the new year, we are going to see companies now, if not putting all their data into, or the workloads into the clouds, but I think the trend that will continue is just that multi-cloud environment or hybrid cloud, whereby companies will have some data sitting on-prem and the other data in the...
Talking about the evolution of Gen AI to use something called agentic AI. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, and if you haven't just yet, it's something that's definitely going to be on everyone's radar over the next few months. Hello and welcome to this special edition of ITWeb TV. Today I'm joined by my colleague, news editor Admire Moyo. Admire, welcome.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Feels awkward sitting on the other side.
Sure
I'm used to sitting there, but yeah, all good.
Pays to get here first and take this seat. So today we're going to be talking about our predictions for 2025. Obviously, we've got our little crystal ball there. We've been through it. We've got some kind of ideas of what we think is going to happen over the next year. Let's get going. I think the big topic for me that we've seen over these past couple of years has been AI, particularly generative AI. I'm going to start off talking about the evolution of Gen AI to use something called agentic AI. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, and if you haven't just yet, it's something that's definitely going to be on everyone's radar over the next few months. Looking at all the vendors that are talking about it. So yesterday, John Ruiz, who's the global CTO and chief AI officer of Dell, talked about agents that will operate autonomously, communicate in natural language, and interact with the world around them, including working in teams of other agents and humans. They'll also be fine-tuned and optimized to perform assigned specific skills like coding, code review, infrastructure administration, business planning, and cybersecurity. So it's kind of automation. It's giving them their own autonomy to kind of do what they need to do within a certain set of parameters. Gartner predicts that by 2028, at least 15% of day-to-day work decisions will be made autonomously through agentic AI, which is up from 0% today. So I think next year, 2025, is going to be a big kind of jump in that. I don't know what you've seen around AI, if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Adrian, like the sort of investments that we saw companies making this year, 2024. Yeah. And I'm sure this will certainly continue into the coming year. Speaking of the big tech, we saw companies like your Googles, your Microsofts, your AWSs. They all made some quite significant investments into AI, be it by buying other companies or just investing in what they already have or increasing their teams. Locally here, NASPAS, we recently covered their results. You could see that the biggest talking point in their full year results was about AI, how the company wants to invest more into AI. I think the CEO even said we'll be doing everything AI to boost their e-commerce business that is doing well. So I think this trend is set to continue going into the next year. I know there have been quite some fears about, you mentioned like AI automating jobs, and I don't know though that like
not rather than whole jobs, but like certain parts of tasks. I mean, that's the way that they always talk about these things, isn't it? It doesn't replace jobs; it just augments tasks. Augments jobs.
As a journalist, Adrian, how is AI actually? Gen AI also, has it made our jobs easier?
It's a good question. I think in some ways, yes, it has. I mean, I think it helps with kind of ideas and kind of getting some background research in terms of writing stories. I think certainly at ITWeb, it's not something that we'd want to kind of replace human journalists with. We need the humans to go out there to find the stories, to write them by all means. I mean, we've been using some form of AI in like Microsoft Word with kind of grammar corrections, etc. for years. So, I mean, it's been part of our kind of background processes.
Yes.
But obviously, in this past couple of years, it's just kind of been tuned up a notch or two. But yeah, I mean, I think there's certain tasks that we do that AI will benefit us by using.
Yes.
I mean, I think one thing that you kind of touched on, which I thought was quite interesting, and it was a stat that I've seen in the January issue of Brainstorm, is 47% of CIOs say that AI hasn't met their return on investment expectations. So I think there's a lot of people playing with it, which is great, but they're actually expecting it to kind of be turning on and kind of turning revenue immediately. And I see from, again, some of the predictions, Forrester specifically said most enterprises fixated on ROI will scale back prematurely. So they're kind of talking about companies playing the longer term game. There's obviously been issues about supply shortages, expectations not being met. I think investor pressure, probably board pressure I imagine the CIOs are getting a lot of pressure of, I've heard this thing, I use Gen AI, why aren't we doing more with AI? So I suspect the CIOs are under a lot of pressure to make AI visible within their organization, and to kind of get the benefits coming through. Yeah.
Even on this show, Adrian, if you remember, like on ITWeb TV, most of the delegates that we have brought here from the banking industry, from insurance companies, the trend was that all of these companies, they're looking to invest in some AI of some sort. I remember talking to the chief data analyst at FNB, and they were saying they will be integrating more AI into the banking application. So it's something that we are going to continue seeing intensifying going into 2025.
I think one thing, so I was recently on a trip with IBM to their research center in Zurich, and one thing that they talked about there was the idea that we're not just kind of looking at large language models anymore. So that was obviously what kind of, with ChatGPT, everyone kind of suddenly woke up to the idea of large language models. But I think the new thing is going to be something called small language models. So the idea is that a large language model, so there's some stats I just picked up, is ChatGPT 4.0 supposedly has 200 billion parameters that it works from, whereas an SLM is about 10 billion. So it's obviously working from a much smaller data set, and that means that they're a lot more focused, and they're a lot more kind of lightweight and less power intensive, which is great from a kind of ecology point of view, energy consumption point of view. And one of the kind of key takeaways that I took from the IBM trip was that they were talking around, you don't rely on public data, but it's then more kind of private data, and that's your competitive differentiator. So I think the adoption of small language models within organizations is going to be something that we'll see kind of coming up more frequently, where they kind of turn that upon their own data and it becomes a competitive differentiator. I think their phrase was not about big data, but about good data.
Is it? Okay.
Which is
interesting.
Catchy phrases. Okay, cool. And I think one other thing that we've got to expect coming this year, we've seen a little bit of it, or coming up in 2025, we've seen a little bit of this year in 2024, is regulation.
Yes.
I mean, we had the white paper policy. I know you guys in the news team have touched on it. Yeah, I think we'll obviously see some kind of movement.
Yes. I'm sure we'll just take the same approach that we did when we adopted POPIA. Like when the GDPR was passed in Europe. So now in EU, they already have like an AI policy that they do have. Yeah. So I think the Department of Communications is leading the charge in making sure that we also have got some kind of regulation surrounding artificial intelligence. So I think next year that's when we'll see like a lot of activity in regards to the regulation of AI locally. And also I'm sure like other African countries are also going to be following suit as well.
Yeah. I mean, that EU AI Act, again, something I saw before, is that apparently it's already kind of enacted, but really from February next year, they start they're moving it out in a phase or deploying it in a phased kind of approach. So February, Chapter 1, Chapter 2 come into place, which prohibits the use of AI systems that influence a person's consciousness or purposefully employ manipulative or deceptive techniques. So that's obviously great that they're starting to kind of clamp down on those things. Then codes of practice in May, and in August, further rules will come into place about notified bodies. So those are kind of independent not quite regulators, but assessors of whether AIs are compliant with this kind of code of conduct, or this act that's being introduced. But as you say, I think the EU wants to be like out there at the forefront, as it did with the GDPR, and it wants everyone else to kind of follow. And I suspect we did quite well with Popia by taking that approach of being ever so slightly behind, seeing what they've done. And I think if we are kind of already, if the wheels are turning with the policy and the kind of legislation taking place, then that's good to hear.
And I also think the information regulator this year also mentioned that they are actually looking at how best they can regulate AI. So I think this is something that we can also look forward to come next year.
Yeah. I think one thing that perhaps the last thing around AI that we'll touch on in this episode is AI PCs.
Yeah.
Now I know there's been kind of a lot of that's the way you see these kind of waves of new technologies coming into PCs, and little by little they kind of integrate into the market, and we'll start to see them across laptops that corporates buy, and then they'll come onto a consumer kind of level as well. Yeah, I mean, what's your take on AI PCs?
I think one of my colleagues actually this morning, when she was pitching a story, she's writing a story from Dell, which is predicting about 2025. So one of the biggest takeaways from that report that says 2025 we'll see the rise of the AI PC. So I think this is something that we should also look forward to. Earlier this year, also on ITWeb TV, I got to speak to HP, who also think that the adoption of AI-based PCs is going to be increasing going into the next year. So I think that's also another space that we should take a closer look at. And of course, like you said, enterprises will start with these kind of investments, and maybe later you and me will also be buying our.
I think in Britain, I've heard anecdotally that some people have started adopting them already, but they're finding that their users are struggling a little bit with the kind of the nuances of these PCs. But yeah, I'm sure it'll kind of come to pass, and it'll ride the wave through everyone's PCs.
Exactly.
Okay, so AI. What do we want to talk about next? I think the other big issue is probably security.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of kind of issues around security this year. What do you think's coming up next year?
I think the cybersecurity landscape is going to continue being, it's going to continue. Companies still need to up their game in terms of their cyber preparedness, because I'm sure going into the next year with also AI now also being used for the wrong reasons, maybe to commit cybercrime, we are going to see an escalation of cybercrime incidences like your ransomware and so forth. So I think we are going to continue seeing organizations making more investments into cybersecurity. I also feel that since governments are increasingly getting targeted by cyber criminals, we might see more policies being formulated to counter the cyber threats that we are facing. I also think this year we also saw, with the wars in Ukraine and so forth, we can see that cyber warfare is increasingly being used. Yes, be it drones so we expect next year to see nation states, I think, increasingly using cyber. I think it's going to be something that we should also keep an eye on. Yeah,
I think one thing to add to that, I think nation states will be the kind of key perpetrators, if anyone is, of this next issue. And it's something that I spoke to ABSA's CIO, Johnson Edessor, and their CISO, Manoj Puri, earlier this year. And we raised the issue of quantum cryptography and kind of the idea that once quantum computers reach a certain stage, they'll be able to crack existing cryptography. So again, on this IBM trip, they were talking about post-quantum cryptography. But I think what they want to kind of rebrand it as is modern cryptography.
Okay.
They don't want the quantum to be the kind of scary factor. It sort of is the scary factor, I think. And there's kind of, it seems like the US has kind of put a deadline down of 2030 for companies to start rolling out this new cryptography, this new quantum safe cryptography. And I think the advice that I got from that was that vendors are going to start pushing it through. So if you rely entirely on vendors in your kind of ecosystem, then you'll need to kind of push them and make sure that they are doing something about quantum safe. But essentially, it'll kind of all happen. The challenge is going to be when you're building stuff yourself, or you've got kind of suppliers who build stuff for you. Everywhere that you've got some form of digital transaction, so whether that's information being exchanged or a literal transaction for financial reasons. I mean, obviously the financial services and the telcos are going to be the big targets, I imagine.
Yeah.
But anyone who's got cryptography in their kind of IT landscape needs to start thinking about this thing. Because, once this is kind of, it's turned, someone kind of works out quantum computing to the level and is able to turn it to crack cryptography, it's going to be something that, is going to be a threat for everyone. But as they said, there's a kind of like, there's a 5-year lead time to get it in place. The problem is cryptography is just dotted around all over the place in the ecosystem. So it is something that people need to be kind of aware of, I think.
So I think IBM is one of the leading companies in regards to quantum, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of quantum computing, I think there's quite a few computing or companies focused on that. It's one of the kind of leaders. It's got this roadmap and they kind of mapped it all out. It was, it seems like they're sticking to it. They're going back like 3 or 4 years all the way up to 2030. But they've also put, I think, NIST, so the National Institute of Safe Standards in Technology. I think that's what NIST stands for. The US has basically kind of called for, I think, 4 standards around quantum safe cryptography. And I think IBM's provided 2 of them, and the third one was provided by someone who now works at IBM. So they're very invested in this area, and it's a key focus for them. But I think it's a key. It'll need to be a key focus for everyone going forward.
Awesome.
One of the other things when I was doing my reading that I thought was quite interesting, it's not really a prediction, but something that I kind of came across from Splunk, was the idea of student-powered SOCs, so your SOCs. I think the idea, particularly within government, and I read it and I just thought this is ideal for something in the departments, because I think we've got a lot of, we've got a lot of unemployed youth in the country. There's this kind of skills gap of people who've got certain levels of skills, kind of fresh out of college or fresh of getting their qualifications. But then there's a gap of companies expect a certain level of experience. So I think if there's a way of harnessing young people with the right kind of certifications into SOCs, particularly in government, that could help massively, and it can kind of give them experience. It can also help protect the vital data that governments deal with. So I just thought that was quite an interesting thing. And then another one was Forrester, came out around the crowd following the CrowdStrike incident, that they think there's going to be a major software vendor will publicly expose their software supply chain in 2025. So that's obviously, there's concerns. Everyone blamed Microsoft initially. It wasn't Microsoft. It was a CrowdStrike issue. So they see that someone's going to just say, this is everyone that we use in our kind of ecosystem. So if there is this issue, then, it's kind of, that transparency, I suppose, helps. And it means you can identify potential risks, or like you're aware of what's happening.
Indeed.
Improves trust, I suppose, is the ultimate there. Next, should we talk about cloud?
Yeah, sure. Interesting.
Okay.
I think on cloud, I think we no longer have those issues that we had previously, like when companies were initially hesitant to invest in cloud, citing things like Geopolitics. I think now all those myths have been kind of demystified. So I think going into the new year, we are going to see companies now, if not putting all their data into, or the workloads into into the clouds. But I think the trend that will continue is just that multi-cloud environment or hybrid cloud, whereby companies will have some data sitting on-prem and the other data in the cloud. So I think that's a trend that we are going to see. What I'm not sure is like are companies beginning to realize like return on investment on the investments that they have made into the cloud. So I think maybe going into 2025, we're going to see like companies now looking deeper to see like if they're actually getting value from their investment. If it is about cost effectiveness that made them invest into cloud, are they realizing those benefits? I think that will be the defining moment for cloud in 2025.
Yeah.
And we also see, like all these data centers being, built, especially here in South Africa. I think it's also an indication that it's a market that is actually growing. I think now we have Microsoft, we have AWS, we have Vantage. Yes, and the latest one I think was Equinix, which recently opened like a data center here in South Africa. So I think 2025 we are going to see continued investments into cloud, and we also have got these different submarine cables landing into South Africa, and I think we're gonna see a lot of traction in regards to cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two issues there. I think one is the connectivity issue. Undoubtedly, we're going to see more in connectivity across the country. I mean, particularly with Starlink. We're definitely going to see more that's going to feature in the news more regularly, particularly across Africa. I mean, it's already kind of picking up. We're getting stories on ITWeb Africa about issues with it being sort of available illegally and people adopting it illegally. But as time rolls on, I'm sure it'll get licensed in more and more countries. This year, obviously, Cyril met Elon. And they hopefully discussed the possibility of Starlink here. And I mean, it's something ICAS is working on, I'm sure. But I mean, to go back to cloud, I thought the IDC, and it's such a weird kind of thing to see IDC talk around cloud modernization.
Okay.
To me, cloud is quite a modern idea, really, because it's so kind of current. But so they're talking that organizations that successfully modernize their architectures will benefit from improved return on investment. So I think it's that time to kind of really assess what you've done already in the cloud and to start kind of making it work for you. One of the other things that I picked up was by Forrester, and one of the other analyst houses covered it as well, was around the idea of VMware. Obviously VMware was bought by Broadcom. We've seen not massive kind of issues locally, as far as I'm aware, but I think globally there's kind of been more traction around people leaving VMware. Certainly that's what's been reported internationally.
They stopped supporting something, right?
Yeah, they've changed their product models, I think. But I think Forrester has said that by 2025, most major public cloud providers will increase investments in private cloud, and offerings like Nutanix and OpenStack will see increased user interest. VMware's largest 2,000 customers will shrink their deployment size by an average of 40%. So that's huge for VMware. This reduction will be driven by increased migration to the public cloud, on-premises alternatives, and new architecture. So again, I guess that fits into your cloud modernization. But I think that's a kind of huge change. I mean, when you consider how influential VMware was in kind of the shift to the cloud. Of course, it's not done. That's just a prediction.
So let's before we move on, Adrian, since you mentioned Starlink, if you can just look into your crystal ball, are we going to get Starlink next year?
Where are we? 2025. I suspect we will. I think they'll kind of get over the regulatory issues. I mean, a big point of that is potentially around the kind of issues around Elon's position within Trump's administration, President Trump's administration, and then our geopolitical approach or stance sitting between China and the US. And perhaps that'll all be some kind of chess game of like, we need to move there to do this to allow them to do that. But and we've obviously got the frameworks in place, or we need to kind of sort out the frameworks around ownership issues. And I know ICAS is working on that. But my gut feel is that Starlink is keen to kind of get it out here.
Yeah.
And I suspect I think the one misconception with Starlink is that it's like a cheap alternative just because it's available everywhere. I think it's still going to be relatively expensive, and I'm sure you'll see it in lodges, you'll see it at mines.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's going to help the kind of the rural communities like everyone thinks it will, but maybe there is something that Cyril's talking to Elon about that we don't know behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to kind of give public Wi-Fi base from Starlink. Who knows? We'll see next year.
Of course.
Okay, so I think the other issue that we obviously wanted to talk around, you met Nteto this year.
Yes.
Yati, who's now the chairman of ESCOM.
Yeah.
He's survived a year, and he made a bold prediction that we wouldn't see, this was pre-election you met him,
Yeah.
he made the bold prediction that we wouldn't see any load shedding after the election. It wasn't just an election stunt. And touch wood, to date, we haven't seen any load shedding since. But he didn't say anything about 2025. What's your take on that?
He said we are unlikely to witness load shedding in 2025.
Okay.
And when we aired the video, I got a lot of inquiries it was just before the elections. So I got a lot of like people just saying, this one is just talking about elections. But for some reason, I had belief in the way you are speaking, because you are saying it all boils down to the maintenance that they were doing at the different power stations. Because they were previously, he said the maintenance program was not going according to schedule. Sure. So with all the maintenance that they were doing and the leadership changes also that they did at ESCOM, it was looking, promising. So for some reason, I just, believed him. And up to now, I thought after elections, we're going to go back again to load shedding. But up to now, I think it's over 200 days without load shedding, and which is good for the ICT industry as well, because the telecoms were, complaining that because of load shedding, sometimes the network, was not really up to scratch, and they made a lot of investments in batteries, and which were still vandalized during times of load shedding as well. Yeah. The data center operators spent billions on diesel. But looking into 2025, I think people still, or businesses, I think they're still going to continue their investments in alternative energy sources, because, even if you look, South Africa is gradually adding renewable energy sources to the grid. Yeah. And I think forward-thinking businesses don't want to be caught in another situation whereby we have maybe stage 4, stage 6 load shedding, and you have, and you have not made like enough contingence plans to invest in things like MTN. The HQ here is already like a solar plant. I think Vodacom as well. And most data centers, Terraco, yes, they are willing power and so forth. Amazon also, I think their data center, they are powering it from solar. So I think this is a trend that we are going to continue to see with organizations increasingly continuing with their investments in alternative energy sources, so that they don't have to be 100% reliant on ESCOM.
Well, I suppose the other part of that is obviously you've got the kind of the green angle to it, and that's great from a kind of saving the planet. But there's also the cost issue. I can't remember what the percentage cost that ESCOM's seeking, but it's an annual cost every year. Is it 20 to 30%?
Exactly.
And that's unsustainable. You're going to have to pass that cost on somewhere to consumers, to your kind of clients. I think investing in green energy makes a lot of sense. Okay. And we touched on it briefly, but I think probably one of the big issues next year is not so much close to home, but it will certainly affect us, is the change in administration in the US. President Trump, President-elect Trump, has talked about an imposition of tariffs. Whether he carries through on that is kind of, I think we'll wait and see. But potentially that will kind of intensify the trade wars that we're already seeing with the US and China. I think we might see, and there was a headline earlier this year about if the BRICS collective decide to kind of challenge the dollar and create their own currency, he's going to start putting 100% tariffs on anything imported from any of those countries. Obviously, we are an exporter to the US. Just some of the stats from SARS from October, 7% of our exports go to the US, 8.4% go to China, just as a kind of comparison there. So I think that's quite interesting. If there's some kind of kickback in terms of whether the US impose tariffs on goods coming into the country, whether that's BRICS related or not, will there be some kind of bipartisan, well, if you're imposing tariffs on us, then we're going to impose tariffs on you. I think it'll be interesting to see how that all maps out. Supposedly Apple will kind of negotiate deals because obviously they import a lot from China. I think it's going to be an interesting year to see how that all shapes up. What's your take on it?
It's quite interesting that even before President-elect Trump is inaugurated next year, we've already started to see some tensions going on there. The Biden administration actually imposed some tariffs, I think, on Chinese products. And only last night, coincidentally, the Chinese also retaliated by targeting NVIDIA, which is a US-based semiconductor maker. Now they are accusing it of anti-competitive behavior. And we don't know how this probe will go. So I think with Trump also coming and judging what happened when he was still the president, that's where the trade war between these two biggest economies escalated. So I think this will also continue. How this will affect South Africa, we'll just also have to wait and see, like you have said. But from other business executives that I've spoken to Alan Dixon, who is the chairperson, the CEO of Roynet Group. They also exposed a lot of things. So he also said we are just waiting to see how this will pan out. But yeah, we just need to fasten our seatbelts and see how.
But I think interesting that you mentioned NVIDIA. I think one of the companies, and we've not touched on it, that saw a little bit of turbulence this year was Intel. I mean, for a few years, that's kind of had a downward slope. It's been facing troubles. And then having got rid of their CEO, Pat Gelsinger, recently, and he was admittedly only there for a couple of years, but I think he was supposed to be the hope to turn things around. But I think there's probably deeper rooted issues there. So it'll be interesting to see how Intel kind of fare over the course of 2025.
Exactly. And also going back to the issue with AI, I think these semiconductors, we are going to see, some interesting stuff in that front, because one of the reasons that perhaps the US is putting some restrictions on US semiconductors going to China is they are afraid that the Chinese may end up using some of the artificial intelligence for military purposes, so they don't want to be overtaken. So I think we are also going to see competition increasing amongst these big economies in regards to AI deployment. Be it for military purposes or
I mean, there is again something from the AI, not the AI, the IBM trip. They were talking about this AI alliance, and I think it was quite apparent when they showed the map, and I think it was 130 kind of sign-ups of universities, governments, sort of academic and kind of public sector institutions that were involved, as well as some kind of major vendors. And I think there was a lack of presence of African kind of bodies in there. I think that's set to change this year coming in 2025. But yeah, I mean, part of their idea was that the idea of, Google's original thing is using technology for good. And I think that's kind of what they're hoping the AI Alliance is hoping for, that people don't use AI for anything bad, including kind of warfare. But yeah, we will see. I think my last closing point, which I just thought was quite interesting, came from Werner Vogels, who's the CTO of Amazon, who was talking like his predictions for the year, one of the things was talking about, as we increasingly rely on technology in our day-to-day, we expect more organizations to adopt similar tech strategies that prioritize deep thought and critical thinking. So we have our phones with us all the time. We often I'm just distracted, and suddenly you're out of your kind of flow of work. So he thinks there's going to be a movement of less distracting devices coming up. He mentioned like a couple of things of examples where this has happened in schools and where they've seen like the benefits of kids not being kind of addicted to their phones, more loud lunches, they called it, where kids are talking again at lunchtimes in the canteens and stuff. Unfortunately, he did plug the e-reader, the Kindle, in his kind of little blog as something that allows that kind of, so it did seem slightly like a sales pitch for one of his products. But I think there's a very valid point there. I think the mindfulness we could regain from not being addicted to social media, not being addicted to our emails, not being addicted to the Black Mirror, as the TV kind of series calls it. I think that would be strong.
I think also like looking at Australia.
The social media ban.
Yes, it's a social media ban on teenagers. I think some countries are also going to start looking at that and see like, okay, what can we also learn from? I don't know how feasible would that be for Australia to kind of police social media amongst teenagers.
That's the challenge. It's easy to kind of put that legislation out there. It's very hard to police it because if you want to, I kind of used this analogy before, but like when I was younger than 16, I used to go and buy cigarettes illegally. Or we used to find a way of getting cigarettes. Just do it that way. But I think you always find like kids
some loopholes
through, if they're kind of innovative enough, they kind of work ways around things. Oh, I'll just put in 1970 as my year of birth, and then they'll get into these sites.
And they understand these technologies better than the people who are trying to regulate.
But I'm sure there's some AI algorithms being deployed there as well.
Exactly.
It's going to affect Facebook or TikTok's revenues. They'll do something about it, I'm sure.
Another thing, Adrian, that also like caught my mind this year was the war in the Middle East, when the Israeli government allegedly used pagers to attack Hezbollah. Yes. I don't know how they managed to do that, but there was a time when because the members of Hezbollah thought if they used smartphones, they were going to be intercepted by Israeli intelligence. So they decided, let's now use the old school pager.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, those pagers started exploding, and some walkie-talkies as well. They started exploding. So I'm kind of thinking, like, if we now have got the capability of weaponizing these devices, is this not going to come to our phones, that maybe our phones have got some little bombs in there? Like
I think it was very specific. I mean, obviously they've integrated the supply chain, which is kind of something out of the movies, effectively, like the way that they've kind of gone about that. But I mean, for you and I, hopefully, unless we annoy some of the technology companies massively in 2025, I don't think we're really the targets for that kind of thing. I'm touching wood again. Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
There's something I wanted to also mention.
Producer Leslie.
Yeah.
Let me come in there. So I wanted to, I don't know if that's I wanted to talk about the growth of Sora, since I'm also in the video industry. So yesterday I was watching a podcast or a review by Marcus Brownlee, the most famous, the guy that does the biggest
Podcast.
unboxings.
Okay.
Yeah, for Apple and other devices. And he was saying the Sora, the actual version, has actually arrived. And then right now, like, they're saying they're not taking information or data from regular people, like, but surprisingly did a prompt and he asked for someone that's reviewing a phone. Then surprisingly, on his desk, there's like a plant, like some of these plants. And then on his desk, it was exactly the same plant that the prompt brought up. So it's kind of weird that we might not know that these people are actually taking our information, or you might not know, like, you can prompt a ITWeb TV podcast in the future, and then you'll find that it's exactly like this. So it's kind of tricky, and it's hard to kind of differentiate what is AI and what is not, because now it's kind of like hard to see what is real and what is not. I feel like it's going to even have a offloading effect in terms of cybersecurity. We're going to need more cybersecurity experts in terms of visually seeing what is real and what is not. And I think my prediction towards that would be like, I think next year there'll be more ransom attacks just because of the technology getting bigger. And so,
yeah, no, I think, I can't remember where I was reading it, but they were talking about deepfake technology, like a counter to deepfake technology. That's what they see being introduced. So that kind of ability for AIs to assess deepfakes and work out and like flag this as a deepfake, that's going to be more kind of prevalent in the year ahead. Which, yeah, as much as it can be used against us, hopefully it can be used for us.
Yeah, definitely. Anyways, yeah, sorry for interrupting you guys.
Thanks, producer Les.
There we have a cameo from producer Leslie, very rarely seen on camera for our ITWeb TVs. But yeah, I think that's a great point to wrap up. Admire, it's been great chatting to you. Leslie, thank you for the cameo. To our audience, thank you for sticking with us during 2024, and we hope to see you in 2025. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And yeah, stay tuned, because I think we've got some great things coming up.